So let me try to share the screen meanwhile. Uh, I hope you can see my screen, right? I mean,
Yeah,
sharing.
it's
Okay,
available.
perfect.
So about the doubt, sir, can I ask now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Please.
So yeah, I was trying to simulate all sorts of 2D poison point processes for the various simulations we have
Mm-hmm.
to do, and notice that in order to simulate in 2D, we have to do R into square root of uniform distribution for
Mm-hmm.
rho.
Right.
So
I
what
see.
does the square root term occur? I'm confused about that. Can you explain a bit? So I initially was doing with R and got all sorts of wrong results for that. And
Can
then
you uh, can you repeat your question? I mean, you are now simulating the locations of these points. I mean, you have generated some number of points, I believe.
yes,
Yes, sir. Sir,
Yeah.
in this, if we have to, for example, in 2D space, we take that radial direction,
Mm-hmm.
radial position. So
Mm-hmm.
for that radial position, if we simply uniformly distribute between 1 and r by multiplying that r between with any random number between 0 to
Mm-hmm.
1,
Mm-hmm.
by that we are getting wrong answers. Like our simulated result is not matching with our analytical result. But if we take
So.
that r into that square root of that number between
Mm-hmm.
0 to 1, that gives us the uh, almost matching results.
I see. I see. So if I got your, I mean, what are the, I mean, things that you are plotting? I mean, nearest neighbor and SINR, these things.
No, so it was that probability versus that lambda.
any
So in
sort of
that,
thing, sir. As an example for the bias problem or the
Right. Right.
SCR.
Mm-hmm.
So it's any 2D Poisson point process where we have some typical user at the origin and
Mm-hmm.
some base station distributed in a circle or a disk around.
Mm-hmm.
We did all sorts of
for
I
sir,
see.
for
I
any
think,
2D
yeah.
any 2D process, we have to take that square root. But
Yeah. I
without it,
mean,
it's different.
I think I got your question. I think your question is, in case you have generated some number of points to belong to this Poisson point process, for generating the locations of these points, you have to put their distances as r times. Previously, I had explained we have to do r times. I think I had done only for the one-dimensional thing, right? In the class.
Yes,
Or
sir.
did you?
Yes,
Huh.
sir. Yes.
yes,
And
sir.
now you're saying that it should be this random or uniform random variable, let's say x, where x is let's say uniform between 0 and 1, right? And now instead, a more accurate way to do it is something like this. Is this what you're saying?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hmm. I see. It can possibly happen. I mean, I have to look into it. I have to do the simulations myself. But I think it should. It occurs because of the fact that for a distance. I mean, for this two-dimensional thing, the square root comes in, which means to account for a certain number of points within a certain distance. Right. If you increase the distance by, let's say, 1 unit, the number of such points increases in terms of the square of the increased distance. So I think that's why individual distance distributions no longer remain uh, r times a uniform distribution. Rather, they become something like this. But I have to think about it. Precisely, to put it more precise, the point that I'm trying to say, a uniformly located point simulate, I mean, if you want to simulate a uniformly located point within a circle, is its distance uniform between 0 to r, or is its distance governed by this equation? So this is something you have to prove. I think Aditya, you were saying something. You had unmuted briefly.
Yes, sir. I also looked up in Quora, and there's a good explanation of why we need to square root of x.
So, okay, can you explain it to us?
Yes, sir.
Probably. Yeah.
So actually, the number of points that we have to plot as, I mean, the PDF of number of points that we have to plot in a circular area is not actually constant. So it actually increases linearly. So for our distance, if we have to say there are some x points, so we need to
Mhm.
ensure that for 2R uh, arc, there will be twice as many points than there were in R. So from that, we can actually generate a PDF of these number of points that should be lying at a distance r. And if we assume our circle to be of radius 1, then we can say that our PDF is linear with a slope of 2x. And from that, we can obtain the CDF of this given PDF. And when we do that, we will observe that from 0 to 1, the CDF is actually integral of PDF. So that's just x square. And to generate that CDF, we actually do the square root. So
Okay, I think I got some of it. Can you share this link with us? Probably it would help us to go ahead with the simulations.
yes, just give me 2 minutes.
Sure, sure. Vaibhav and Saradip, was it okay for you, this explanation? I don't know if you got the entire reasoning behind it, but probably if you follow the link he said, and then we can come back to this discussion in the office hours, which is the next time we meet.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think this makes sense to me because of this very fact about the number of points which grow as you increase unit distances in the two dimensions. Okay. While we wait, so Aditya, you can directly post it in the classroom page, okay, and then we can look into it.
Yes, sir, I'm just looking for it in my history.
Okay. No problem. You can do it after the class. It's fine. Okay. So today we will finish off what we were discussing regarding the cell load, and again there is just one or two concepts which are remaining, and after that, until this point, if the development of the cell load and how you can derive a mean cell load when you have been given the traffic intensity and the radius of a single cell, these things are clear. I think there is not much more to it. Just extra thing which we studied in the end is, if you have been given this expression for mean cell load, or you have been given the value of the mean cell load, there is a method to calculate the average number of active users in the cell, right? And we saw that how it comes from the distribution of this queue, active users in the queue, and if you find out the average of that, you find out that it's rho bar by 1 minus rho bar, which is the average number of active users. So then most of our things would have been solved, because that's what we were looking for. We were looking for this number, right? Which gives us our final expression for rate, right? So this dictates between how many users you are actually sharing your total resources, and this term denotes, or this term somehow dictated your rate as a function of the distance you have from your serving base station. So it takes both the things into account: the resource sharing, which is dictated by this term n, so resource sharing, and this one is the relative distance, and both of them together uh, together they characterize what the rate that a individual user is getting, right? The problem that we had encountered at the very end of the previous class was how to go about this calculation, right, if the cell shape is not circular, right? And I had explained that in case of Poisson-Voronoi tessellations, or PV tessellations, it is more often than not the case that not only the size of the cell is unknown, the shape of the cell is unknown. And since we were calculating our mean cell load using an integral over the distances of the user from the serving base station, they can go until different limits in different directions. Right? So one of the proposals, which is which is a fairly recent one, I think it was after 2015, that people from stochastic geometry, which then became conscious about this aspect, that we have to take care of the relative distance of each of the users from and all the things that we had discussed in the previous class, right? That although the arrivals of the requests is homogeneous, and if you take a snapshot of the coverage, you would see that users generally accumulate towards the cell edge, and as a result, the entire spatiotemporal process does not remain homogeneous. So these kind of things people started to realize by, let's say, 2015, and there was a paper which appeared which said that how to take into account this dynamic traffic, right? So dynamic traffic, and I had explained that in the end what we are trying to do is we were trying to find out rho bar. Let's remove this integral for the moment. And if you have, let's say, homogeneous arrival of traffic in your area, so total amount of traffic that is coming into your network area or cell area is W times AT, right? AT previously we had approximated by 1 by lambda t, right? Again, remember that this is not not an exact characterization, because as I mentioned, the sizes of the cell is not the same. This is just the average size of the cell, but we have an expectation of 1 by, right, bandwidth log 1 plus SINR, right, of that tire T, right? Again, if there are multiple tires of this type, this will be not lambda T, 1 by lambda T, but the probability of associating with that tire and so on. But nevertheless, this area of a cell is a function of how dense that tire is, as well as how dense the other tire is, as well as the relative powers of these both of the tires, which dictate the probability of actually associating with this tire, right? And I had explained in the previous, right at the end of the last class, that doing this expectation over this distance, there is another way to do it, is something which we already have, is the distribution of the SINR. So we would actually be calculating BR, or B log 1 plus gamma, where gamma is the SINR. We multiply it with the PDF of SINR, right? And again, this AT remains PT times 1 by lambda T, right? So why this is valid? Because regardless of whatever the shapes of the cell sizes are, so suppose this is one of your cells, right? Regardless of whatever shape or size this cell is, with our stochastic geometry development of the SINR coverage probability of the typical user. So typical user is generally a user which is located at the origin. So it's a user something like this. So we have taken into account all the possibilities of its distance from its nearest base station, right? Its nearest base station could have been at a distance of 0. It could have been at a distance of infinite. That means ergodically, again, we have taken into account all such users. If we concentrate on this cell only, and suppose these users can be present anywhere. So by taking into account of the fact that for a single user, the base station point process across all its realization could have resulted in the serving distance base station to be anywhere between 0 and infinite, following the probability density function which we have derived, which is 2 pi lambda r e to the minus lambda pi r square. We have actually taken into account all such possibilities of users for a single cell, right? And thus, this gamma, or this PDF of gamma, takes into account not only the entire shape of the cell, but also across all possible shapes of the cell and sizes. Is this point clear, that why this evaluation of this expectation with respect to R, which was difficult for the case of randomly shaped Poisson-Voronoi cells, is a, I mean, these two evaluations are equivalent to each other, whereas the first one was more difficult to evaluate, but the second one is now easy to evaluate because PT of gamma is something which we already have. We simply need to differentiate 1 minus the coverage probability at gamma, because the coverage probability of gamma was the CCDF of SINR. Okay. So in case you have done your simulations, I think some of you already have, since you are since you mentioned that you were trying to simulate this type of networks. So in case you have already done these simulations, what you have to do is carry out the same type of analysis, and by the time you reach the SINR coverage probability, you would numerically find out the differentiation of this SINRs. So I hope that you would be able to do it, because simply an SINR coverage probability in your MATLAB code would be a sequence of numbers, right? And you have to use the first principles of differentiation, which means you do SINR at second point, or sorry, coverage probability at the second point, second SINR minus coverage probability at the first SINR divided by coverage the SINR2 minus SINR1. And you use these first principles to do the differentiation and just plug it in here and find out rho bar. And again, once you have rho bar, you would have n, and once you have n, you would be able to find out the rate of a user. In fact, you can go ahead and calculate the rate coverage probability and all the less analysis that we did before. Okay. This part actually brings us to the state of the art, which means that this is the latest thing that is currently in use. But there are some identified challenges or some identified problems with this kind of development. And I'll tell you with the help of a paradox, which means that if I look at a finitely sized window of the network that we have simulated. So let's say that there are 4 such points within it. So individually, your Poisson-Voronoi cells would be boundaries between each of them, right? And the SINR coverage probability, which we have derived here and used to derive the PDF of the SINR, right? That SINR coverage probability is done, or that analysis is done from the perspective of a typical user, right? Now, a typical user is defined as a user which is located at a imaginary origin of this Cartesian plane, right? Now, what it means is that we are randomly dropping a user in the network, right, and moving the origin to that user and analyzing its SINR characteristics, right? Now, what issue with this is that if you try to drop a random user, so if I give you 2 methods of evaluation of the SINR, let's say type 1 and type 2, right? In the first case is the typical user approach, typical user approach, in which what we are doing, we are randomly dropping the user in the network, then select the cell in which the user lies and do the SINR analysis with respect to that cell, right? The second type, which we would call the typical cell approach, which would involve randomly selecting a cell, right, and do the SINR analysis of users located inside that cell. Okay. What we are currently doing is type 1, because since we are using the PDF of the SINR, which was derived by considering the SINR characteristics of the typical user. So the typical user was this randomly selected user in the network. And if you compare it with a different type of approach, where we, out of these 4 possible cells, we select one of the cell and do its SINR coverage analysis, which means if we select this red shaded cell, we would try to do the we would put users inside this area, and we calculate the SINR coverage across all the distances where the user can be located. Do you think that both of these approaches would result in the same PDF of the SINR? What do you think? Are these 2 different approaches clear to you?
Sir, if the cells are uniform, then they should result in the same thing ultimately.
So cells are actually not uniform, right? I mean, in each realizations, the cells are of different shapes and sizes. The number of cells, of course, are also different in different realizations, right? It can happen that in the same window of observation, in a independent realization of this same Poisson point process, it might happen that now 5 of these things are present, right? So as a result, you have something like this, right? So I hope the context is clear, right? The context is you just put a point directly in this network. So let's say the point is here, and then you select that cell, which means you are selecting this cell, and then you do the SINR analysis of the same. Right? The cells are not uniform because the numbers are also not same, and depending on the numbers, each of these cells are of different sizes and shapes. We can also not say that there is no identity of the cells. Like it's not that this cell has now become this cell, and we are looking at such cells over a period of over a set of realizations and saying that okay, cell number 1 has the same distribution as cell number 2, which is here. It's not. This is not what is happening, right? Is it clear what the question is?
Yeah, in that case, sir, in the type 1 approach, all the cells for all the users, they would average out to some SINR analysis. But in type 2 approach, the SI analysis would depend on the cell that we are actually choosing. Since we are not looking at all the cells and looking at one cell,
that's correct. But of course, okay, in typical type 2 cell, you say that you are selecting a cell randomly. Let's make this uniform. Okay, so uniformly randomly selecting a cell, to be more precise. So uniformly randomly selecting a cell, which means what? Which means there are 4 cells present in this first realization. The probability of choosing one of these cells is 1 by 4. There are 5 cells present in this second scenario, right? Second realization. The probability of selecting one of these cells is 1 by 5. So you carry on such kind of activity for across all infinite realizations, and at each time within this window, right? If you are selecting one of these cells, so in the type 2 method of evaluating the SINR, you look at how many cells are created, right? And you take one of these cells uniformly randomly depending on how many cells are created, and you consider those selected cells, right? On the other hand, in type 1, at each of these independent realizations, you do not select a cell at random, right? You drop a user uniformly in this window W and select the window in which this user is being dropped. I mean, inherently, do they seem different approaches? I mean, we'll come to this discussion on.
They should be equivalent.
I mean, you agree that these are different approaches, right? I mean, whether they are equivalent or not, we are coming to that discussion. But these are inherently different types of evaluating the SINR.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Does everyone agree? So after this 2015, let's say, or I think 15 or 14 or 15, a paper came which evaluated the statistics of something called a zero cell. Okay. So zero cell, what does it mean? So zero cell is the cell in which the typical user resides. Okay. I mean, it's not a physical cell in one of the realizations. It's a hypothetical cell, just as the typical user is a hypothetical user, which inherently, I mean, typical user epitomizes the average nature of the users inside the network, right? A zero cell is the cell which has the typical user inside of it, which means if in the first realization, right, which is this one, the typical user was here, right? So let's actually define an origin. So let's say this is the origin. Okay. So which means in this case, this is the zero cell realization. And again, if we have the origin here, we don't move the origin. In that case, the zero cell realization is here, and across all the realizations, we collect all these samples of the zero cell, which means there are infinite realizations, and then accordingly we have infinite number of such samples of the zero cell. The first sample being this one, the second sample being this one. It says that the zero cell is, I mean, the result of this paper says that the zero cell is statistically larger than a typical cell. Okay. Why is this true? Because you see that when you are dropping a point randomly inside the network, you have a larger amount of probability to get dropped, right, inside a larger cell as compared to a smaller cell, right? Which means that if I take I mean, I'll give you the example from the perspective of these two realizations, but you always have to imagine yourself that what I am saying is holds when the number of realizations are actually infinite across all the possible realizations of this Poisson point process. Which means that if I draw the statistics of an imaginary cell, let's say cell number 1, which has two possibilities of or two examples here, two realizations here. This is the first realization and this is the second realization, and we do it across all possible infinite realizations. And another cell number 2, which also has a infinite number of infinite number of realizations, but it has been chosen as if we chose 1 out of 4 with a probability of 1/4 here. Select that as a sample, call it sample 1, and 1 out of 5 here, select that as a sample and call it sample 2, and we generate the statistics of this cell 2 using these samples, whereas in cell 1 we just dropped the user and selected that cell and accordingly created another sample, let's say S11 and S-1 and S-2 and so on. So what this result said is that if you are looking at the area of a cell which is statistically characterized by these samples S-1, S-2, S-3 and so on, that area of that cell is statistically larger than a cell created by such realizations of S1, S2 and S3. The reason being, the probability of getting dropped inside a larger cell is larger. Basically, if you look at this window, right, I mean, I'll give you an extreme case, right? In this extreme case, let's say that these are the two possible points which have been realized of the Poisson point process, right? And accordingly, I mean, this is your Poisson-Voronoi tessellation inside this window, right? That means what? It means that in the process 1, right, which is type 1 type of characterization of the SINR, you were dropping the user uniformly inside this window, right? The probability of getting dropped inside, let's say this cell 1, is larger than the probability of getting dropped inside cell 2, right? So in across all possible or infinite times of you have done this experiment on this same realizations, you would have dropped the user inside cell 1 more number of times. and accordingly you have done the SINR characterization of the user with respect to cell 1, which means cell 1's SINR statistics has been carried out more number of times than cell 2's SINR statistics or SINR characterization. On the other hand, in type 2 type of evaluation of the SINR, you would have taken cell 1 half of the times and you would have taken cell 2 half of the times, right? And accordingly it would have been a bit more fair as far as the cells are concerned themselves. Okay, probably from a user perspective it might not, the type 1 characterization is a more accurate depiction of the network, because naturally more users lie inside cell 1. So you would want to give the cell 1's SINR characterization more weightage than cell 2's SINR characterization. But from a network perspective, which means from the perspective of a network operator, when he tries to see what is the load of cell 1 versus what is the load of cell 2 versus cell 3 and so on, a typical user perspective does not give an accurate picture, because statistically this kind of evaluation you have done for a cell which is larger than an average cell, as if it was picked from the distribution of the total cells. Is intuitively this line of argument clear?
Sir, can you could you repeat the last part that you said, the utility of type 2? Like, why would someone be interested in type 2 analysis?
Right. So for a network operator, he is running 10 number of cells and he is interested in the load of all of these cells, right? So cell 1's load is something, cell 2's load is something, and cell 10's load is something. He goes to a different city and these 10 cells are distributed in a different manner. He is still interested in the load of these cells, right? On the other hand, what type 1 characterization has given you is the characterization of the load of an average user, right? An average user lies inside a larger cell. Did you get my point? But from the network operator's
Yes.
perspective, you are interested in the statistics of all the cells, as if you would have taken one of these cells. For a network operator, there is no need, without any other reason. We will not get to those reasons at this point. But from the network operator's perspective, in order to have a properly dimensioned network, or in case he wants to use his resources efficiently, he would want to know that all his cells are operating efficiently, right?
Yes.
So in that, right? So did you get? He would. If there are two cells, he would say that, okay, first cell. With half probability, he is interested in the statistics of cell 1, and with half probability, he is interested in the statistics of cell 2. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what this says is this zero cell, which is the cell in which the typical user resides, is statistically larger than the typical cell. Remember, and these terms might be confusing if you read literature on this, typical cell is not the cell in which there is the typical user. Typical cell is an average cell selected uniformly randomly from the total distribution of cells. Zero cell is the one where the typical user lies, and the typical user statistically lies more number of times in a larger cell as compared to smaller cells. As a result, a zero cell is larger than a typical cell, right? The area of zero cell is something which the area of typical cell is something which even to this date has no let's say neither closed form solution or an accurate characterization. Some of the authors have tried to address it recently, but it's still an open problem. And that's why if I come back to this discussion, that okay, from our perspective, we will do all our network analysis using this approach, which means we will be using the SINR PDF distribution of the typical user or the zero cell. We will call this as the mean cell approach. So mean cell approach. So mean cell approach is nothing but what we have been discussing until now, which is try to find out the average load of the cell by doing an expected value over the SINRs of the typical user. right? So although we will be using this mean cell approach to do our network analysis, which means what is the rate, what is the throughput of the network, and what is the probability that you go into overload and these things, you still have to keep this in mind, that this is not a complete characterization of the entire network, precisely because of the reasons discussed above. Is this part clear, or is there any intuitional doubts you have? Yes, no? Okay, if this is clear, I would like you to just add, I mean, I hope that you are doing the simulations on your end. What I would hope is just add a couple of lines to actually calculate the load of the cell now. You must have reached a place where you have calculated the SINR, and you, as I explained, you can find out the PDF of the SINR and calculate the average cell load and find out the average cell load. So what we would like to observe is this average cell load with respect to the density of the deployment. Of course, it goes down. What we would try to observe is that lambda, or that density of base stations, which results in an average cell load less than 1. So this is possibly 1. This type of graph or this type of characterization tells the network operator, and this is a very important one. This is I know we are discussing it in the 10th or 11th class, but this is one of the first things that goes into mind of a network operator planning to deploy a new network. For example, if tomorrow Jio wants to deploy 5G base stations operating at a new frequency, he would envisage what would be the number of consumers or subscribers to its network, and accordingly it would simulate a certain traffic density and try to find out what would be the average number of base stations, for example, to be deployed in Delhi to sustain a 5G user traffic. Because if you deploy less number of base stations here, you would have the possibility that some of these cells getting overloaded. So that was the purpose of this final module of this single tier and two tier networks of mean cell approach. If this is clear, we will complete our discussion on this and move on to the next module, which is on millimeter wave communications. And please interrupt me if there is any questions on this part, because if not, we can move on to this other part.
Sir, one last thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was asking that since we discussed that the typical user approach results in cells which are larger than actual cells, right? In practice. So can we use a typical user approach and then use some, as an example, bias factor to reduce the cell size after doing the analysis to account for that effect and approach it that?
I'm not too sure that I got your question, because suppose we are looking at only one tier network. Suppose we are only observing a single tier network, right? There also this concept of typical cell and versus the zero cell remains, right? Because if you look at a user-centric approach, which means you want to characterize, or if you want to select a random user from the network and see what are its SINR characteristics, that would be a different analysis, or it will give you a different result as compared to randomly picking one of the cells of a single tier network. Bias comes into the picture when there are multiple tiers, right? Or are you mentioning that
I'm not talking about cell range. No, I was not talking about cell range expansion. I was just talking about using some constant factor to account for the fact that the actual cell size is somewhat smaller.
Right. So generally this happens, which means that there is a prioritized addition to one of these cells, which means there is an intra-tier bias factor to account or to do load balancing across the base stations of the same tier. Although we are not studying it in this course, but this is actually generally done. The reason for that is not only not only the size of the cell as respect to the other cells, but also it matters where the other base stations are located, which means that if there are a lot of base stations located around you, which means your SINR is going to degrade anyway, you would preferably have to have a lower amount of uh, uh, area inside you, so that you want to sustain a lower amount of traffic. And in case there are no base stations around you, you would want to have a larger cell, even larger than what is given by this Poisson-Voronoi tessellations, just because the interference is so limited that you can actually sustain a larger traffic. By larger traffic, I means users which are located very far from you as well. So yeah, intra-tier base station or let's say base station specific biasing and intra-tier biasing, these are, I mean, valid concepts, but I think we are not worried about this at this moment.
Okay.
Was this your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But I can probably, okay, that's a good point. Let me note it down, and I'll probably share some resources on this. But they are fairly, let's say, engineering resources, in the sense that they are 3GPP specifications which recommend the use of such bias factors for a single tier network. You can go through those and see what are the different strategies to do this prioritized association to one of the base stations, even if you are in the coverage area of a different base station. Okay, with that we can move to the next concept, and we will not go into too much mathematics today, and just discuss some architectural principles of how to go about modeling millimeter wave communication networks. And this has become very relevant right now because you know that the higher frequency spectrums are going to be auctioned anytime now inside India as well, right? So the 28 gigahertz for outdoor, 60 gigahertz and above for indoor communications, these type of spectrums will be auctioned very soon. And when the operators buy it, some devices are already there, which market themselves as 5G ready. So they will be able to operate in this communication or this frequencies. Okay, so this is something which we would want to be aware of.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. Like related to this only, sir. Like just now you said, I had also seen that in outdoor they'll be auctioning a higher a lower like 20 yards and 60 yards for indoors. So, like why shouldn't it be the opposite one? Because outdoors there is more chances of interference. So
So it's, I mean, it has just to do with the propagation. So as I had explained
okay.
previously, that the lower the frequency, you are able to transmit to a further distance, right?
Okay, I didn't.
And yeah, so indoor you are just concerned with less than 10 meters or less than 15 meters of transmission ranges. 15 meters is, I mean, very less. I mean, in conference halls or something like that, where an access point is deployed on the top of the roof in the middle of the room, and you want to serve the certain number of users inside the room and so on. But outdoor you are, I mean, looking at least hundreds of meters and possibly 1 kilometer with millimeter wave communication. So that's why we go for the lower one. Okay, so a couple of things. I mean, as you would see that as we develop this notion of millimeter wave communications, the differences, I mean, the modeling more or less will go in the same lines, which means that the base stations are still modeled as their locations are still modeled as points of a Poisson point process. The users will also always, as previously, are uniformly distributed over the network. So I will not be going from into this topic from scratch, right? So it will just be enough to just discuss what are the differences that have come in with higher frequency transmissions. So one which we will be discussing are blockages. The second, what we will be discussing is beamforming. And experiments have shown that our fast fading model is also different. So these are, let's say, three basic points in which the classical sub-6 gigahertz networks, which we have been discussing until now, differ from millimeter wave networks. Okay, blockages I have already discussed that millimeter wave transmissions are highly susceptible to blockages. It is very unlikely that outdoor deployed base stations would be able to cater to indoor users. I mean, currently in 4G networks, this is not true, right? I mean, you get your 4G signals inside your home as well. This will possibly be not true, for 5G, for millimeter wave communications. And not only that, even outdoor, your signal can be shadowed by temporary dynamic blockages, like vehicles if they are moving, or if you are moving, it can be blocked by the building and so on. The millimeter wave signals have also very less ability to diffract around the blockages, which means if there is a transmitter located here, and you are possibly transmitting with a omnidirectional beam, a sub-6 gigahertz transmission, I mean, you must have done these kind of ray tracing examples in your fields and waves class, right? So depending on the frequency, the amount of diffraction that you get, so this was the actual path of the signal, this is the diffracted path of the signal, the amount of this goes down with higher the frequency, which means if the same omnidirectional transmitting element is now transmitting at a higher frequency, specifically in this millimeter wave spectrum, it has low ability to diffract around blockages. Okay, we'll not go into the physics of this, but just to understand this fact that if a user is located here, it is very unlikely that if the direct path is blocked from the transmitting element, that this user will actually get any signal. So that is something which we will be focusing on, specifically because to make a difference between this line of sight and non-line of sight, these terms we will be using throughout the module on millimeter wave communications, which means next couple of classes. So this line of sight and non-line of sight visibility state of the user with respect to its transmitting base station as well as the interferers dictate what kind of path loss models we will use. The model still remains some constant multiplied by the power. We will have some other term as well, which I will discuss in the beamforming. So for the moment, let's call it G, which is the trans receive antenna gain or beamforming gain, or directivity gain, let's say. We will still have d to the minus alpha, but this alpha will be different for line of sight and non-line of sight. And I had briefly discussed this before as well. So alpha is, I mean, experiments have shown that for millimeter wave transmissions, as is the case of other things, I mean, other frequencies, if you are in line of sight, you generally follow the path loss model of a free space, which means alpha is near about 2. And it's of course greater than 2, but it's about 2.1, 2.2 and something like this. For non-line of sight, alpha n is rather closer to 4. Okay, so in millimeter wave communications, we will discuss two types of networks. One would be our generic two-dimensional point process network, in which case we will say that farther you go from the user, so suppose this is the user and these are the locations of the base stations, we will start with a model which is a very straightforward one, which says that the farther you go from the user, the more probability there would be to be in non-line of sight, which means this guy would have some probability P1 to be in line of sight and P2, 1 minus P1 to be in non-line of sight. And this guy has a probability of P2 to be line of sight. So P1 would be greater than P2 statistically. And it's normal, I mean, because you would assume that a base station located closer to you has a more chance of being in being in line of sight. This is the first model that we would study, how to go about this characterization of such probabilities. It comes from something called random shape theory. And as we have been doing in this course throughout, we are not interested in the exact mathematical development which brings us to this probability, but just have a intuitional knowledge about how these probabilities are derived. But our focus would be on to use these probability values to actually characterize the network or to study the SINR characteristics of the user. Okay, because if you go into the mathematical development of these things, it's a completely different course then. The other model that we would be studying about blockages are urban cellular networks. You might have seen in the course description that this comes after stochastic geometry primer 2. So which means that at this stage we will take a pause and do a couple of hardcore, let's say, stochastic geometry theory theory classes, and then we would go into modeling urban networks, which is millimeter wave deployment as seen by Verizon and AT&T. So these are the operators in US which have the first deployments of millimeter wave base stations. So about 150 base stations. This is, I think, last year or the last year data in San Jose, and AT&T had a similar thing in in some other city of California. But they were deploying base stations across the city along the streets, right? That means that if, okay, my pen suddenly decided to stop working, but let me just draw the figure and explain this fact. Okay, oh yeah, I got it. So suppose this is the network of roads inside your city, and suppose a base station is located at this point, right? So it is very likely that a user which is located very close to it, so suppose the base station is probably here, let's say, and a user is located here, right? So it is very unlikely that these two users and base station, amongst themselves relatively will have a line of sight link, because they are precisely located in different streets. Why this would happen? Because these millimeter wave signals which are coming out of this base station of this triangular shape, they would have very less possibility to diffract around this corner and reach this user, which was previously not true for 2.3 gigahertz or even lower frequencies. Okay. On the other hand, if there is another base station located very far from it, so let's say here, it might be possible that this base station is in line of sight with this user, precisely because they are located on the same street. So this previous model which we were discussing, which is this probabilistic nature, that the farther you go from the user, the less likely you are in the line of sight, is no longer true for actual deployments that the operators are studying or the operators are going to deploy. And we will see that some of the inferences that we will draw from such a network are very different than some of the inferences that we will derive from this characterization. By inferences, I would roughly what the operator is interested in, how many base stations to deploy, where to deploy them, how to position them inside this deployment area. These are the things he is interested in. What we would see is sometimes these kind of modeling differences predict very different results, which means probably the model 1 would say that to sustain 1 Gbps of users for these many users user density, you would probably need to deploy 10 base stations per square kilometer. However, in this kind of more accurate modeling of an urban propagation setting would completely change this number 10 to something else. So to study these kind of networks, what we will be studying initially are something called Poisson line processes, and something called Poisson line Cox processes. So Poisson line Cox processes. So we will take a couple of lectures of these theoretical developments, which means now these users, or let's say we will start with modeling the roads of a network using a stochastic process, which means this line themselves are some kind of random processes, right? Additionally, the user locations on those lines are an independent point process in 1 dimensions. Okay, so as a result, what happens is that the location of these users becomes doubly stochastic. Did you get this point? So these user locations are random inside each line, where each line itself is a random process. So these type of processes which are doubly stochastic are called Cox processes, COX, after a guy with the same name. And we will start our discussion using this Poisson-Cox processes, and we will see how we can use it to model such kind of urban networks.
Is it like a random variable y and another random variable x which is conditioned on y?
Exactly. I mean, you can have. I mean, it's the same thing but for processes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Right. So you can. I mean, you can think about. I mean, the example which you were giving is more of this nature. That suppose my distance to the nearest base station d1. We know that it is a random variable, and it has a distribution of 2 pi lambda x e to the minus pi lambda x square. But if I impose this condition that lambda is another random variable, this is the example you were stating, right? We will come across these things as a sub part of this larger problem where the entire process is random based on a parameter which itself is random. Okay. There are other applications of this, and since we will do this entire theoretical derivation or theoretical development together, I would like to cover those things as well. I mean, particularly about this Poisson-Cox process, what happens is that there are other kinds of networks, for example, like enterprise Wi-Fi. If you go to a airport, right, or a shopping mall, you would have Wi-Fi access points related to or associated with each of these shops or outlets, right? So suppose if I denote these Wi-Fi outlets using these type of circles, right? The locations of these Wi-Fi outlets might be modeled as a Poisson point process, because, or they can be more regular because they are inside a mall or something. But what happens to the users is that the users tend to let's say concentrate around these Wi-Fi outlets. Okay, so the user locations are no longer uniform around the entire network. So although these circles are uniform around each other, the location of these users are accumulated with circles as their centers. So these are sometimes modeled as something called cluster processes, where if you forget about the location of the circles for the moment, and if I delete these things, the location of the users can no longer necessarily be considered to be a Poisson point process, right? So this is also a type of doubly stochastic process where the location of the users around each circle is random, whereas the location of each circle was random to begin with. This is the second type of thing that we will study. The third type of things that we would study is something called a hardcore point process, and we will not go into theoretical details of that, but just a conceptual introduction to it. It means that in Poisson point processes, if you remember, there is non-zero probability that 2 points can be very close to each other, right? I mean, for example, if there is a Poisson point process located at this location, it can happen that another point of the same Poisson point process is arbitrarily located very close to each other. But this type of deployment for base stations naturally does not happen, or in case we want to model some larger things like buildings and so on, it doesn't happen that a building of this size has an arbitrarily located another building very close to it, right? So this guy probably will not be located somewhat like this. So that means there would be a necessary separation distance between two elements of this process. So that is what is called a hard core between the two types of points. Okay, so these three are examples of doubly stochastic processes which we will study that would help us in developing the first notion of modeling blockages in millimeter wave networks. Beamforming, I'll come to fast fading in the next class, but a brief introduction to why beamforming is important. So beamforming necessarily refers to the direction in which your antenna is oriented to serve the user. So it forms, the base stations generally form a beam like this in order to serve the users, right? What happens in case of regular networks, so suppose these kind of networks, you have your user located at the center, and your serving base station has its beam oriented towards you, which means this guy is probably has a beam which is directed towards you, which means you fall inside the coverage area of the beam. However, all the other base stations might be serving all several other users located randomly around it, right? So it might happen that an interfering base station has a beam which is directed somewhere else, right? So it might happen that this guy is beam forming towards this direction. So it means the impact of interference of all such base stations which are actually beam forming at a different direction simultaneously when you are being served from your serving base station is different from the impact of interference whose beam lies along your path, right? So these are the some let's say additional nuances which we will build into our millimeter wave system while studying it. Fast fading, it's a very minor difference, but it will be important for our theoretical development, because if you remember, the first step in evaluating the SINR coverage probability was to account for the Rayleigh fading. We had the fading on the left hand side, fading power was exponentially distributed, and accordingly fading power to be greater than something else become e to the power something. If we do not, so what it turns out from the experience from the experiments is that the fast fading in millimeter wave is not Rayleigh distributed. So now how to account for this new fading, and how do the expressions change in our SINR coverage probability when this new fading is into the picture? So these are the three important things we would be covering in the subsequent, let's say 5-6 classes, out of which 2 of them would be stochastic geometry primer 2, which means we will get introduced to new tools of stochastic geometry. I hope the introduction is clear. Before moving on to, so today, the rest of the time, I have planned to take another quiz of you. It's a very simple quiz, which means if you are familiar with the evaluation of the average cell load, you would be able to do it within 15 minutes. But still, let me schedule it for about 30 minutes to 40 minutes, and I'll be here answering the questions. Okay, so let me just upload it right away. Meanwhile, if you have any questions regarding this particular topic of millimeter wave systems and what are the things that matter in such kind of deployment, please feel free to ask. So I have uploaded the quiz. The points are still 5. The due date is today, and the time I give up to 5, let's say 45. Okay, I think all of you should be able to do all the questions. Okay, so I assign it. And you should be able to view it. Okay. So it's the same development that we have been doing in the previous class. What you have been given is some lambda a and some lambda u, some sigma, with which you can find out what W is. So W is arriving in this cell area of radius 1 kilometer, right? Every second, every per square meter. Right? So some amount of traffic is coming. So you have to use the method that we discussed in the previous class to find out the average cell load. Using it, you try to find out what is the expression for the active number of users in the cell. Right? And there is an additional question. We say that we consider that the bandwidth is divided equally among the average number of active users. But to write the expression for the average throughput and calculate it for this above parameters. Again, there is a note which says that if you are unsure about any parameters or parameter values, you just put in dummy values, and the actual number, as I have mentioned time and again in this, throughout this course, the actual answer that you get, whether it is correct or not, is very irrelevant. It is for you to be able to know how these things are calculated, and the method that you would use that matters more than, whether it's, let's say, 10 dB power or 20 dB power or whatever.